A pan pizza is a beautiful thing. It all starts with this airy, chewy dough, topped off with a sweet and tangy tomato sauce, and that's covered with a molten blanket of perfectly melted cheese and whatever toppings you want. Building that foundation of your pan pizza with a super flavor-packed dough is the most important first step. So, into my mixing bowl with some flour, then a nice sprinkle of instant yeast, and I'll give that a quick whisk to make sure it's evenly combined. Into a separate bowl, I have some lukewarm water. You should be able to feel with your fingers even that it's just slightly warm. And to that, I'll add in a nice sprinkle of salt. It's nice to put the salt in here so it mixes well with your water before you add it to your dough. And then in we go with our salt water. Even right away, you should start to see some bubbles just like that. Then attach your dough hook attachment and very slowly start to mix. At this point, it's very important to make sure that you scrape everything off the sides of that mixing bowl and that you're not losing any of that flour. Once I can see that most of that flour is combined, I'll go ahead and turn up my mixer just a bit more to let the dough do its work. If your dough starts to sound like a little bit of a song, then you're on the right track. You just gotta wait, listen, and as it continues to develop that gluten, it kind of continues to change its song and sounds. It really just means your dough is starting to come together. Let's just appreciate the music for a second here. I'll be your DJ. Okay, that was fun. So another little secret to this dough right here is that bread flour, which we use for pizza dough, has a higher protein content. And what that's gonna do is give us more of that chew that we look for in a good crust. We're actually gonna let it rise in the pan that we're gonna bake it in. This right here is a Detroit style pizza pan. That's the type of pizza we're going for here today. It's a light metal pan that's gonna cook the pizza super evenly and give us that beautiful, nice crust that we're going for. And to start, I will drizzle all of it with some nice olive oil. Then I'll carefully scrape out all of my dough, and then I'll lightly oil my hands. I'm gonna be very delicate with this beautiful dough. We're not trying to force the dough to do anything. Don't stick any of your fingers too deeply through the dough. Just gently convince the dough to stretch out towards the edges of the pan. Once we've stretched it out to look something like this, we're actually just gonna let it rise for about 2 to 3 hours at room temperature. So don't stress out if it's not pressed all the way to the corners of the pan right now. It'll do all that work on its own. Usually I like to leave it right by a windowsill or maybe in an oven with just a light on, somewhere nice and cozy. While our pizza dough is taking a nice little nap, we'll move on to the next layer of our pizza, which will be the sauce. For the sauce, I still do it the same way that I learned at an Italian restaurant many years ago. And that starts with this nice big can of tomatoes. You can get a can of crushed tomatoes if you like, but I like using the can of the whole tomatoes, and I'll show you why. First, we'll pour these off into a bowl. Stand back, or you will get splattered. Before we add in any of our other seasonings, they taught me at this Italian restaurant to just get in there with your hands. There's something so satisfying and so much fun about crushing these tomatoes yourself. So for the first couple squeezes, I like to stand back. And eventually, once you feel like you've really crushed through all the tomatoes, go ahead and just get the rest of them as evenly as you can. Another reason I like crushing it by hand is because you'll be left with some slightly different chunks here and there, and that does add a bit of texture in your final pizza sauce. My great-grandmother used to yell at us a lot in the kitchen. She liked it neat. But I believe there are a few recipes where it's okay for the kitchen to be a disaster. Pizza is one of them. At this point, you can see that the sauce is becoming pretty consistent. Make sure you search around for any of those slightly larger pieces. But when your sauce starts looking something like this, you're okay to move on. Then to finish out my pizza sauce, I'll add some dried oregano, some nice dried basil. We're not using fresh because it'll burn with that high temperature that we're gonna be cooking it at. A good little pinch of crushed red pepper flakes, which will work really well with the pepperoni. Then a good sprinkle of garlic powder, a generous pinch of salt, and some fresh cracked pepper. Then we'll whisk it all up. Seasoned to perfection. I actually do like it to be seasoned just a bit more than you think you may need, especially when you combine it with all that fat, all that cheese, all that bread. It's nice to have just a little bit extra of that seasoning and spice in your sauce. And then just for fun, I always love putting my sauce right back into my container. I'm not sure why, but I've been making pizzas ever since I was a kid, and I've always liked putting the sauce back into the can once I finish making it. We'll save this for later. Our dough is rising, our sauce is done. Now, cheese. We have mozzarella and fontina. Mozzarella needs no introduction. It's the classic pizza cheese that's gonna give you that nice stretch, but the fontina is where we're gonna get a little bit more of that flavor. And the way we cut it is actually really simple. You can use a knife or a bench scraper, and the goal is to just cut it into nice, even cubes. The bench scraper is just a little bit quicker and easier. It's okay if not all the cubes are the exact same size, as long as they're generally in the same ballpark. And ultimately with cooking, I sometimes like if things are the same size, because again, that'll usually make for a difference in texture, which is always nice. For the fontina, I'll cut off that crust. And with this, I'm gonna make slightly smaller cubes since it's a thicker cheese that's gonna be a little bit harder to melt. Looks like a person. Da, 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 da. Perfect. I'm gonna keep these separate on purpose just so I can know where I'm spreading them on the pizza and keep everything nice and even. So mozzarella on one side, fontina on the other, and that can go right back here. Our crust is done, our sauce is done, our cheese is done. What's left? Pepperoni. For the pepperoni, I've tried to get a specific type here that should curl up into those nice pepperoni cups when it cooks. You don't need to feel pressured to find that, but if you like it, it's definitely fun. And I'm just gonna cut it up by hand since I like doing as much as I can from scratch. You can definitely buy your pepperoni pre-sliced if you like, but I actually just like having it in these full sausages because to me it tastes so much fresher when it hasn't been pre-cut. Now that our pepperoni is sliced, I think it's time to go check out that dough again. Wow. Our dough's been resting for a couple hours now. The dough looks really good. You can see it jiggle a little bit there. For me, visually, that's always a really nice test to just show that my dough has that proper fluffiness, that proper airiness that I want it to have. Now I'm gonna put it in the fridge overnight because that's where I feel it really develops all that flavor. You can skip this step if you want. You can go ahead and bake it now. Because I have the time and because I want that extra flavor, I'm gonna let it sleep again in the fridge overnight. Now I'll grab my dough from the fridge. As you can see, I'm starting by layering out a bunch of my mozzarella. This is where you can really have some fun and be an artist. I think the best pizzas happen when you sort of toss things haphazardly with really no plan all across your dough. If you want to plan it out more and make it more structured, you definitely can. I actually prefer to even just close my eyes sometimes and just throw cheese and see where it lands. Remember, with a pizza, when you're adding on all those toppings, less is often more. You don't want to overcrowd your pizza with some crazy amount of toppings. So that's plenty of mozzarella. I'll move on to the fontina and just kind of fill in some of those gaps. And you'll notice that I'm pressing a lot of the cheese right up against the edge of our pan. And that's because as it cooks, that cheese will melt and get super crispy along those edges. When I'm building my pizza, I'm just constantly looking around, making sure that I really spread things out as evenly as possible to make sure that every bite counts. Now, for our pepperoni. These I'll try to place in between those bits of cheese, some in the corners, but nicely spread out between each other. Try to make sure that there's going to be a little pepperoni in every bite. This looks ready for sauce. Now for this style of pizza that I'm making, typically you want to make 3 nice lines down the pizza. One that will go right through the center, just like this, then one across the bottom, like I'm doing here, and then as you'll probably guess, one is going to go across the top. And I know this looks a little weird. We're kind of placing down these toppings in the opposite order of what most people are used to, but in that Italian restaurant I told you about, they put the sauce on last and it works. And one of those reasons I like putting that sauce down last is because if you just gently tuck some of it into the edges of that pizza crust, it's going to caramelize right up against the walls of this pan, and it is just amazing. And then for my finishing touch before this pizza goes in the oven, I'll put a little bit of cheese right on the edge of all of that sauce. And that way we should get these nice crusty, crispy edges of our pizza. And now that my oven is preheated to a very hot 500 degrees Fahrenheit, we can put this pizza in. What you're looking for with this pizza here is a nice darker char on the tops of some of the crust and the pepperoni, but my favorite part of all about a pizza in this style is that dark, almost jet black crust that you get right there on the edge. That's all the tomato sauce that we put right up against the edge, and it's going to give you this incredible flavor when you go to take a bite. I'll finish this off nice and simple with a few hunks of ricotta cheese. What I love about the ricotta is that it's nice and cold, so it'll give a bit of a temperature shock when you taste it, since this just came out of the fridge, but it's also going to give a beautiful freshness and creaminess. Then we'll tear off some fresh basil and lay that all across the pizza. And what that'll do is accent that dry basil that we put in the sauce. Then I'll top all of that with a nice extra drizzle of olive oil. And the finishing touch is a good drizzle of hot honey, which pairs so incredibly well with pepperoni. As a final step here, I will carefully remove my pizza. Look at one of the crispy pieces of the edge here that fell off as I pulled it off. That is why I tucked that tomato into the side of my pizza. You've literally got this lace pattern. If you can nail that with your pan pizza, you've done something very special. And now, we can cut through it. Listen to the bottom of it, all crispy, right through the center now. And the hardest part really is choosing that slice. You can think of this slice of pizza as this perfect combination of traditional pizza, of a nice fresh baked focaccia that has a super flavorful dough, and then with a few added elements of that Detroit style pizza, the crispy edges, the square slices. If you are going to make pizza at home, please try to make a pizza like this one. I'm gonna remove this cheese just so I can flip this over and show you the bottom. Listen to this. Let's even just get one more beautiful look at the side, the perfect harmony of that golden brown crust and that crispy laced edge that you get from the tomato and cheese. All of these different elements combined work together to explain why I love this pizza so darn much. I mean, every part of this pizza is perfect. And even just take a good look inside our dough here. Look at all those little air bubbles we got, all that flavor that developed inside that dough. That airiness is what's gonna give us a light but chewy bite. Whenever there's a food that is so good that I just want to keep eating it instead of talk about it, that's when you know it's good.